Tayo, may English, may Tagalog, may Bisaya, may Ilocano, may mga Kapampangan. Salamat sa mga Kapampangan. Nandiyan, mga Bicolano, nandiyan ko yung mga Bicolano. Dumating din yung mga Bicolano. Tingnan lang po natin, may Atenista ba dito? Meron isa. Okay. Represented naman po ang karamihan ng mga institusyon sa Pilipinas dito sa ating munting talakayan. Ang ating pong setup ay pasasalitain po natin ang ating mga guest, speakers, ang ating mga experts sa field, ng kanilang mga sentimento kung ano ba ang estado ng pilosopiya ngayon sa Pilipinas. Pagkatapos po nila magsalita, magkakaroon tayo ng balitaktakan. Paano natin pag-iusapan pa, pagyayabungin ng philosophy ngayon? Maganda po ito sa mga undergraduates. Saan po yung mga undergraduates? Sa mga kamay. Yan. Kasi kayo ang susunod na henerasyon ng mga pilosopo dito sa Pilipinas. Makinig po tayong mabuti. So, Brother Romy, ano po ang tingin yung estado ng philosophy sa Pilipinas ngayon? Wala po. Opening remarks.
Magandang umaga po sa lahat. Thank you very much. Apo na ba? So, umaga pa ang pakiramdam ko. Aging. So, thank you very much, Dr. Guzman and all the organizers. Sa totoo po, hindi po, sa amin very, very informal. So, we did not have to prepare anything. But something like 3 days ago, we received an email telling us that we were supposed to give a little something, say something first before the actual open forum or discussion. And so hurriedly, I just prepared something like this. You may or may not agree with me, and that includes the people that are with me today. I'd like to think that this group, which you took pains to gather here this afternoon, belongs to what I would call the second generation of Filipino philosophers. The reason being that, perhaps with the exception of Dr. Manuel Dy of the Ateneo de Manila, all of us here, where po yung nandun? All of us here were once students, and students in the same classes of the late Dr. Emeritus Quito of the University of Santo Tomas, mentioned to us by Jason. Jason, thank you very much for the invitation. Also to the Pilosopiya, Associates Pilosopiya. Please, you have our support here. Well, if that's the case, then the generation of Quito should be the first generation of Filipino philosophers, which also include, among others, the revered Professor Father Roque Ferriols. SJ is still a living legend, and the late Dr. Ramon Reyes. Both of them are from the Ateneo. The first generation of Filipino philosophers are not necessarily the first philosophers in the Philippines. They themselves were a product of teachers of philosophy, which one can imagine was uniformly at the time scholastic and Thomistic, perhaps with the exception of UP, which was already doing something in the line of analytic philosophy. None of them were, in a true sense, Filipino philosophers, these first Filipinos, so-called. But Dr. Quito and her generation were all fresh from Europe, and so were sporting European thinking, but at the same time they were already imbued with the Filipino spirit. And so it is this generation of Dr. Quito, which I would consider as the first generation of Filipino philosophers, underlying Filipino. So I am not concerned with the first Filipino philosopher who perhaps is unknown and unknowable. I'm merely concerned with something like the Filipino Socrates or the Filipino Confucius. Everyone knows there were pre-Socratics before Socrates, and Confucius himself remarked that he was merely being a teacher a transmitter of knowledge. I shall pick out my choice of the Filipino Socrates or the Filipino Confucius from among the first generation of Filipino philosophers. And despite my highest regard for all of them, my choice goes to my own teacher, and that is Emeritus Quito. The reason is because while Ferriols and Reyes, among others, kept themselves within the scope of phenomenology and existentialism, Quito expanded her philosophy beyond them. Almost every semester, we were treated by Quito to a new philosophy. It was from her that we heard of structuralism, hermeneutics, Renaissance philosophy, Plato, Plotinus, Karl Marx, semiotics, Herbert Marcuse, Ludwig Wittgenstein, and even of Indian and Chinese philosophies, as well as comparative philosophy. It was also she who, despite her being a Kapampangan, wrote the first books of philosophy in Tagalog. Of course, the one who you should always remember as a philosopher writing in Tagalog should be Father Ferriols. His pambungas had to be in everybody's library. But the first, I think I stand, I don't know if anybody can correct me here, but the first Filipino philosopher to write ever in Tagalog, I think, is Emerita Quito, despite her Kapampangan. So her Tagalog is Kapampangan. No? One of her books, incidentally, I co-wrote with her, and I'm very proud of that. It was also she who was the first to speak about the Filipino Volksgeist. And so it was also from her that, for example, your father Leonardo Mercado was able to get the inspiration to do what he later called the elements of Filipino philosophy. I think, in fact, that we miss Father Mercado here. If anybody is interested in Filipino philosophy, the first man to come to mind should be Mercado, because he wrote the book entitled, he's very smart, writing, entitling his book, The Elements of Filipino Philosophy. But it is Dr. Quito who first discussed, matters of false guys in her classes. And we were together, classmates, Father Mercado and myself, sitting there under Dr. Quito. So you can see that the scope of Quito's philosophy is boundless. And that's why we ourselves here, including the ones who are present before you, we all belong to different philosophical persuasions. Professor Amable Tuibeo is a consistent Marxist, I think, and you're consistent, right? Kaibigan kami nito. Mag-away din. We were very good friends. We miss each other. Then Dr. Timbreza is a Filipinist. I think that's the most salient thing about Dr. Timbreza. He's a Filipinist. He would like to do philosophy in Tagalog, making the language intellectual, the intellectualization of the Filipino language, especially as applied to philosophy. Then, of course, Dr. Manuel Dy should be remembered for his contributions to both Chinese philosophy and the philosophy of Gabriel Marcel. Okay? If you do Gabriel Marcel, he is the expert here. Dr. Co, who is still coming over, is, of course, very well known when it comes to Chinese philosophy. And he has a 7-volume Festschrift, and I think for that, nobody will possibly ignore his contribution to Filipino philosophy. He is the icon of both Chinese and comparative philosophies. And of course, I do something on Kant and postmodernism. When I now look at the younger generations, I see Filipino philosophers in the making, and they, like us, are of varied persuasions. Your school, PUP, has been the house of my good friend Amable Tuibeo, was definitely a strong influence on the development of Filipino philosophy here. At the same time, many of you have to do further studies in UST. And even in our SBD seminary, the Christ the King Mission Seminary, that's where I am from. So, binata ito, dahil merong vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. SBD po ako. Nagtuturo po ako sa, among others, sa Christ the King Seminary. The advantage of being of my age is I don't want to be tied anymore to only one institution. So I am teaching at the seminary. I'm also teaching in UST. I can possibly not teach in UST. UST is my home base. I am a Tomasian at heart also. And then I'm teaching also at the Loyola School of Theology in their philosophy department. And of course, I'm teaching also in Tagaytay, which is our school. It's a theologate, but they found a means to invite me to teach there. I'm doing Kant and Runner with them in Tagaytay. This is the first time I'm handling a course like that, Runner and Kant. And I was doing it happily. And it's final exam is already time next week. So at the same time, many of you have to do further studies in UST, and also at the Christ the King Seminary, and so you cannot help getting other shades of philosophy. At UST, the chair himself is coming from Nietzsche and critical theory. Dr. Bolaños, he does not belong to this group. He is much younger, and he's doing critical theory, and his master's thesis is on Nietzsche. So the combination of Nietzsche and critical theory, Adorno or Heimer, that kind of thing. And when you do critical theory, you should have Marx in the back of your mind. And so in the seminary, I invited him to do Marx. He's doing Marx this time with us. UST is keeping itself strong likewise, despite itself, in the phenomenological and existential traditions. The Filipino philosophy of Father Leonardo Mercado has been influenced by a class which we took up at UST, also handled by Quito, then enriched by a course on cultural anthropology of an Indian professor. This was also very much like the Filipino psychology of the late Dr. Virgilio Enriquez of UP. UP used to be the bulwark of logic and linguistic analysis, but it seems to me, my impression could be wrong, but it seems to me that now when you talk of logic and linguistic analysis, this discipline, you can also count on De La Salle University, am I right? Certainly. Yet all of these schools, so you see how varied the philosophies in the Philippines are. Yet all of these schools and universities would not help but welcome the other varieties of philosophy. This is an open attitude, which I think we should attribute first and foremost to Emerita S. Quito. And so Quito is my candidate for the Filipino Socrates or the Filipino Confucius. None of us here can claim that, and much less can we claim to be the first Filipino philosopher, who I earlier said is unknown and unknowable. And all we in the second generation of Filipino philosophers can hope to accomplish is leave a legacy of living philosophy which you, the younger ones, can build upon. And that's why all of us here continue to read, continue to study, continue to write. All of these are writers. We are all contributing to journals and even writing books. So it's only by writing that we will be able to sustain the legacy which we call Filipino philosophy. So only by committing our thoughts on paper can we secure this legacy, which we call Filipino philosophy. Thank you very much.
Ngayon naman po,